Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the meetup. On today's agenda, Scott will be providing an overview of the capital project planning maps and apps. As a reminder, we'll be recording and posting this meetup on meetup.com shortly after the meeting. During the meetup, if you'd like to make comments or chat with other participants, then use the chat panel. However, if you'd like to submit a question to the team to answer, then please submit your questions on the Q&A panel. With that said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Scott.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sound good.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today. We wanted to take a few minutes to give you an overview of the capital project planning maps and apps. It's a mouthful for a Thursday afternoon. But essentially today we're going to go through a collection of solution offerings that we've had for quite some time and actually are a direct result of a partnership we had with the city of Tampa several years ago where we defined the high-level workflow for capital project planning and how ArcGIS and maps could help coordinate those capital projects. We have plenty of time for questions today, so as Chris said, if you guys do have questions along the way, don't hesitate to ask, and we'll try to answer them right on the spot when you have them. So to get started, let me just give you, let's just provide a quick summary of what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to show you a collection of solution offerings that support the capital project planning process. And when I say that, what I'm really referring to is everything from project definition and coordination of those projects, and that work ultimately results in a capital improvement plan for your communities. And then once that capital project plan is approved and you fund those capital projects, you'll see a set of solution offerings that help engineers and operations managers and essentially those responsible for tracking the schedule, quality, and cost of those projects going forward during the construction process. So you'll see a whole collection of solutions that kind of help with the first phase, which is essentially everything from project definition to the development of your CIP. And then once you fund the projects, how do you track those projects throughout their development life cycle and ultimately report the status of the projects to internal stakeholders and external stakeholders like citizens in your community. What you'll see is that while today I'll probably focus in on one specific asset type, water distribution, let's say, you'll see that the solution is flexible to support any asset you have in your community. We're focused primarily on water, sewer, and stormwater, and even transportation infrastructure, but you could certainly apply these same principles to physical assets that you maintain in the parks or facilities in your community. As I mentioned a few seconds ago, the two primary use cases that we really targeted with these solution offerings are the process that your organization goes through to create a capital improvement plan, and then ultimately monitoring or tracking the progress of those capital projects once you fund them and begin to implement them in your community. You'll also see today, I'll talk about several key roles. One key role is the engineers and their role in kind of envisioning these projects and ultimately stewarding and shepherding the projects through that entire life cycle of the CIP process and the actual construction process. In some communities, we've heard that it's really a combination of engineers and project planners. And so you'll see the project planners playing a role there. As projects are envisioned and ultimately move through the review process, many times fiscal analysts or executives in the community will review those projects and looks at funding sources, look at fiscal years in which they're planned for, and then ultimately make a decision to promote a set of projects or propose a capital improvement plan to an oversight committee. And that could be a specific committee you set up for capital project planning, or it could be your city council or county commissioners. And then the last stakeholder we'll talk about in particular at a couple roles is the citizen or the general public in your community. And typically the general public wants to know obviously where tax dollars are being spent. So what is in that capital improvement plan and how does it impact their neighborhood? And then also if they see construction activity in the community, why are they seeing that construction activity? And when can they expect to see the activity wrap up? So the great thing about these solutions is they're really very simple and straightforward to set up. What we provide is a set of service definitions that help you create the layers in your community, a set of groups to organize that content, and then the maps and apps provided with the solution are just configurations of the ArcGIS Online configurable application templates, and web app builder that you can quickly deploy in your organization. So that's a quick overview of the capital project planning solution. Now let's dig in a little bit deeper and maybe look at it as kind of more of a system and how it's coming together. What you'll see today is we'll interact with a whole series of project maps and layers that represent those assets in your community. And we've set these up as individual asset layers because what we've heard from many communities is that typically an engineer or a department or division within your organization is responsible for that asset. And typically they're responsible for envisioning and tracking the capital improvements to those assets. And so you'll see that there's a whole set of maps and apps set up for each of those individual assets in your community. You can collapse these down if you want, but ultimately you can, they're very flexible, so you can decide how you want to implement them in your organization. And those layers then become the foundation of a whole series of focus maps for things around fiscal year projects, a 5-year CIP, and then, as I said, when they're funded, there's a series of project dashboards that help you track the schedule and quality of those projects. The other thing you'll notice with the solutions we'll show you today is that there also is this role for the third-party stakeholders, and I use that term to generically refer to private utilities in the community, other public agencies like maybe a state DOT or a school district within your community that's doing improvements, or maybe you're a county and you want to share these solutions with cities in your community. And so those private utilities or third-party stakeholders really are a great way for you to collaborate and begin to, kind of share your project plans with that, with the external community, and ultimately ask them to do the same. And so you'll see some solutions that help you set that up as well too. So that's kind of a high-level schematic of the solutions themselves. And what I want to really do today is spend the bulk of our time with you, showing you the offerings. Before I do that, Chris, let me just pause and see, are there any questions on kind of the high-level summary of the solution as a whole?
Yeah, we had one question come in from Jeff Pace. He says he recently saw that the CIP layers were moved out of the LGIM and into the utility network. And for them, that it didn't really work for them because many of their projects are not utility related. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so they weren't actually moved into the utility network model. What we did last fall, starting the user conference last year, is start to really refine the content that's in that local government information model. And instead of providing a single database that represents all the layers, what the information model really is now is those essential layers that you'll manage on premise in your, with ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. And it's complemented with a set of feature layers that we provide in a service catalog that you can quickly clone and stand up in your community. What Jeff may be alluding to is the water utility capital improvement planning ArcMap solution that really allows you to do project envisioning and kind of lay out costs for some of your water utility layers. And that has not necessarily moved into the utility network, but it is delivered in its own geodatabase now and kind of is isolated. And that goes for all the water utility layers. They're actually now provided in their own geodatabase instead of as part of the larger local government information model. So that's kind of how that came together. Maybe some other questions. Did that generate some other questions too, Chris?
No, that's it.
Okay, good. All right, so let's spend some time now, the bulk of our time with you today, just showing you the solutions as a whole. And I'm going to start with kind of what this looks like in your ArcGIS organization when you deploy the capital project planning solutions. And what you'll see is there really, much like I described in the slides a few seconds ago, there really are three primary workflows, right? There's the capital project planning maps and apps that are used to design or to kind of envision projects for each of these assets and then ultimately prepare your CIP. There's a set of maps that engineers can use to track the performance of those projects. And there's a set of layers and maps that are set up to engage external agencies. So today I want to start with the capital project planning maps. And when you dive into this group, what you'll see is there's a whole collection of maps that are organized for stakeholders who are responsible for doing that. And that could be engineers who are responsible for the specific assets like stormwater infrastructure and water distribution systems, or it's maps that are used by fiscal analysts and project planners to do plan review and ultimately put forth the capital project plan for executive approval and ultimately adoption by the community. So today I'm going to focus on water distribution and just kind of use that as a model. But what you'll see is for each of these individual assets, the workflow is very much the same. The only difference is, the individuals are dealing with their specific projects in their organization. So the first application I'm going to show you is a configuration of a web application template that's called the Water Distribution Project Planning Map. And this is a simple application that's designed for the engineers who need to envision those projects and start to organize the improvements that need to be made to their infrastructure. And what you'll see, it's a very simple map that's got a whole series of projects that they organize. And some of these are board authorized, some are just being in the proposal stage, but ultimately what you would see in this map is all of the projects that you have planned for that water distribution system. Now, when you implement this map in your organization, what the engineer probably also will want to see is a whole series of layers, and I don't have it in this map, but you would bring into this map a whole series of layers that they would use to actually help them envision those projects. So if you're managing a water distribution system, that could be work orders and service requests that you're fielding and using to influence the age and critical failures on your network. This could be any kind of modeling you did to test the network and see, what the current condition of that network is. And it could be other larger studies that you're using to drive development plans in your community, right? So there's a whole host of different, what I'll call operational layers that the engineers will want to see to help them make the decisions on where they're going to put these projects and propose these projects. And we don't, it's very hard for us to kind of productize that, but know that as you configure these applications for your organization, each asset map will have its own requisite set of layers that help them make these decisions. And once they decide where they want to put a project, it's really quite simple. They can come in and select the infrastructure project layer. In this case, maybe we'll just say we're going to do some work in this neighborhood. And I just come in and identify the extent of the project area. And once I do that, let's drag this over, right? And this is a new water distribution replacement. And so, oops, I actually put that in the wrong place. So the first thing I can do is put together a project ID. So in this case, we're just going to say it's water -17-001 of this, right? And so what I'm doing here is actually just starting to create the project as a replacement of water laterals in the neighborhood. You guys get the point here. What we did is we looked at capital project plans and capital project planning documents from cities all over the country, and what we found is there's a whole lot of failing, right? There's a whole bunch of parallel characteristics that people are capturing. So this one we'll say is failing assets. What type of project is it? It is actually a water distribution project. Do we need to do it for health and safety reasons? We're going to go ahead and say no, it's not a mandate. It is a end of life situation, and we're going to be replacing this existing infrastructure. It's not an expansion or increase in efficiency. We want to propose it for fiscal year 2017. We have a funding source that may very well be, let's just say, connection fees we're funding it with. Or in this case, maybe let's just say we've got system revenue actually we'll use for that. And then at this point, what you'll see is the engineer, because it's a preliminary project, the engineer really is just starting to identify plan start and end dates. So in this case, let's go ahead and say that it's, let's go ahead and say that this one's going to start on August 31st and end, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense since the fiscal year is already here, but and end, let's say December 31st, just for the purposes of demonstration. And right now, I may have an estimated cost of $1,200,000. And some contact info that's required for this project, right? And so at this point, I'm just setting up essentially a project file for this. And so as an engineer, I have the ability, as an engineer that's responsible for this system, I have the ability to really kind of control, essentially envision these projects very early on and track the status of them, and only really push the project forward, so to speak, when I'm ready. So in this case, I'm going to say, you know what, I just want to really say that I'm just starting this project, and maybe I'm just starting to gather information about the project and what the cost may be. Maybe I've gone out and contracted with an engineering company to do some high-level estimates for me, or some design drawings for that as a separate project. And I could just say I'm just beginning to do that. But then when I am ready and want to start to push this project forward for further review by the entire organization, I can come in and mark it ready for analysis and review. And you'll see in a few minutes how that kind of fits into the larger life cycle of the capital project planning process. So at this point, right, what have I done? Right, I've got a whole bunch of operational layers that's available to me in my community. As an engineer, I'm using that information to decide where I'd like to propose capital projects. I've gone in, I've quickly drawn the extent of that project and identified some key characteristics for that project in my community. And in this case, I've said, you know what, I've gathered all the information that's appropriate and I'm ready to push this thing forward. The other thing you'll see is that, we've actually provided a whole variety of ways that you can attach additional information. So in this case, this could be a link to your document management system, which may be kind of acting as your case file for that project, or it could be just a textual description if you don't have that information automated and you're just keeping track of it, maybe in the engineer's filing cabinet. So there definitely is a way that you can kind of capture additional information and make it available as part of this project. So each of the individual projects, yes, go ahead.
I thought I'd interrupt while we're still in this app.
Sure.
A question came in from JJ. So the question is, can you please explain a little more detail the work orders and field request layers that you were talking about? Is this a model? Is there a model for these features, or are they tables supplied by the organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they typically will be probably just data sources you're getting from your maintenance management system and loading into ArcGIS and adding as layers in the map. That's one way. Some organization, that's one way they could come in, right? You could just be looking at the sheer density of where those issues are happening or defects are happening. Or you could be using that to obviously share with an engineering company or some other modeling tools to actually look at consequence of failure on some of these assets as well too. So there's a variety of ways that data can be used. But yeah, typically, right, that's coming from external systems. It's loaded into ArcGIS and then available as layers in this map.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, sure. So as I mentioned, each one of the project planning maps will be very similar. The difference being is that it really will only contain the projects that engineer is responsible for. And depending on how your organizations kind of dole out or manage the assets, you can kind of merge and kind of split and combine these projects as you see fit. Okay, so let's move on. The next thing we want to talk about that's equally as important and that many communities are tracking is pavement moratorium. So probably everyone on the call is familiar with what a pavement moratorium is, but if not, I'll just go over it real quick. Essentially what pavement moratoriums represent are areas within the community where you have recently paved roads and you don't necessarily want to dig them back up. And if you do, there may be additional costs associated with that. So one of the simple things we've done to complement the actual project planning process is set up a simple pavement moratoriums layer that engineers can manage in the community too. And that pavement moratorium layer could be another layer that was exposed in that project planning map that I just showed you a second ago. But the idea here is that it's a real simple way for the engineers who are responsible for the road network within your community to come in and say after they've finished a repaving project or potentially have a project that they just finished contracting out for paving, right? They can come in and simply identify the segment of the road, and it's been issued by Department of Public Works. This moratorium is going to start today because we just finished the paving yesterday. and it's going to go to 1 year from now till 2018. And essentially, you'll see how this is a simple way for you to kind of share that information with external stakeholders and other agencies you work with. It's a real simple way to do that. Now, the city of Pittsburgh did some really interesting things with this pavement moratoriums layer. They actually are automatically generating the moratoriums once they close out a work order, a paving work order in their maintenance management system. So that what I showed you today is a really simple way to track those moratoriums that could be tied directly to and be managed maybe by the engineer responsible for the transportation network. But certainly if you have a maintenance management system, you issue work orders for the repaving, there certainly are ways within ArcGIS that you could automatically generate this pavement moratorium layer from, you know, those pavement work orders, those paving work orders, I should say. So that's the pavement moratoriums map. As I said, it's just a simple way for the engineers to keep track of where those moratoriums are issued. And then ultimately, you guys may or may not have, you know, either penalties, or maybe in some cases you may not even allow people to dig up in those streets for a certain period of time. So let's keep going throughout the process. The next thing I want to talk about are external agencies and kind of their role in the process. So the next solution I want to show you is a configuration of Web App Builder that's really designed for those external agencies that you'd like to collaborate with in your community. And I'm just showing you the application here, but essentially what this is a configuration of Web App Builder with a very focused layer for those external agency projects and a map and an application all kind of bound together that you can share in an ArcGIS group, and then ultimately invite, you know, key stakeholders from those private utilities and third parties within your community. And typically what we hear from communities is that, you know, there is a group, like a project coordination group that most cities have, where they invite in those external agencies, or at least a distribution group that they have. And so this is kind of really promoting that process and really helping you guys capture those projects that the external agencies have and drive those out and some transparency into those. So if I were, you know, let's say someone from Verizon or perhaps Comcast, I could come in here and search for projects that we have going, right? And I can just simply come in. I'm going to go ahead and search for cable projects, and you'll see that here are all of the projects that my cable company has proposed, the years in which they were proposed. This is kind of dated at this point. The other thing I'll point out is the way this layer is set up is that everyone who, you know, what we wanted to do is be somewhat secure with that, right? We wanted to make sure that if I, as a Comcast, someone responsible for Comcast cable, for example, can only add new features and update features that I own. And so I couldn't go in and modify the gas company's project areas or any of that stuff, right? And so it's really kind of helps you guys provide a somewhat secure way to, and a somewhat obscure way for them to come in and add their projects in the community. So I can just, let's turn that filter off. Let's come back here. Let's say I've got a new project that I'd like to propose in this neighborhood. I can come in. And we also designed this solution to be very kind of very simple and straightforward for the private utilities, because we know that, at least what we've heard from many communities, it's very challenging to get this information from. So you can see is much like the project planning maps for folks inside the organization, it's a very, very simple way to just come in and say, I'm part of the cable company. I have a new service expansion project I have planned for this area. Very, very simple information about it. When am I proposing to start? In May. It'll be over in June. It's a very quick project. And some additional contact information for that, right? The goal here is not to ask for a great deal of information, because we know the more information you ask for, the less likely that you are to get it. And that's why it's been set up very simple and very straightforward. And so with just a few clicks, that external agent can come in and they can you know, quickly enter their projects. Now you could further tune this so people could just add projects and not modify them. There's a whole bunch of ways that you guys could further lock down these layers. And we've talked to even some organizations where they don't have a single external agency project app. They actually have multiple apps, one for each respective agency. So the telecommunication company has theirs, the gas company has theirs, and they can only see their projects But one of the things we did want to promote with this concept is the ability for even the external agencies to start to coordinate their projects and see where they're doing work in the same area in the same time period. But you guys can pick and choose how you want to implement it. So that's the external agency project. As I said, it's really designed for those third-party agencies who you collaborate with. It's a way for them to share their project plans. And what you'll see here also is that pavement moratorium layer that I talked about a few minutes ago is actually available to them as well too. So they can see that if they're going to do work along this roadway during this time period, there may be further consequences or challenges associated with that. Okay, so that's the external agency projects. And what have I shown you so far? I've shown you a set of maps and apps that allow you to organize your internal projects by asset, to track pavement moratoriums, and ultimately start to collaborate with external agencies. So as you start to do that, at some point, you're going to want to bring all those projects together and start to think about, how do I organize my CIP or my 5-year capital plan or 7-year capital plan, depending on your community. So the next map I want to show you is the plan review map, and this is really designed for those either project planners or maybe fiscal analysts in your organization who are responsible for looking at all of the projects that are being proposed and begin to kind of sort out, do we have the right funding sources aligned for them? Do we have projects that are maybe conflicting? So I can start to look at these projects, not necessarily all of the projects, but maybe start to look at them by funding source and get a sense for how we are funding these projects. And in this case, which ones are coming from either general fund dollars or revenue funds or special funds that are associated. I can start to see, okay, let's look by fiscal year and see by fiscal year what we have planned for the community. And I didn't for the purposes of demonstration because it makes it a little hard to show you guys, but you could actually time enable this layer and start to look at, okay, here are all my projects for 2016, 2017, and 2018 in the community, and start to get a sense for where might you have overlap on these projects, and ultimately decide, are they ready to be included in the CIP? You can also look at external agency projects and start to bring those in as well too, and see where you may have overlap and want to promote coordination. And finally, are any of these projects going to be impacted by pavement moratoriums we have set up? And if so, how do we properly sequence them? So ultimately, once I've organized those projects, as a plan reviewer, right, I have the ability to then go in and modify these projects and essentially push them forward, and actually either say they're ready for executive review or not. And so in this case, let's go ahead and look at what that next step may be, which is really the map for the executive who wants to see which projects are proposed for the CIP and are they ready for that process. So now, as you can see, right, I'm in this map I just showed you, right, I have all of the projects that are being proposed throughout multiple fiscal years, multiple funding sources, and everything for my community. It's kind of like my project backlog for the next 5 or 6 years. And in this case, right, I've just got those projects that are only ready for executive approval and ultimately inclusion in the CIP. And so if I just zoom in here a bit, you can see we've got a couple projects that are organized for the CIP. One of them is this Benton Harbor relining, and everything's been pulled together and it's ready for executive approval. Another one is the Naperville Downtown Wi-Fi project, for example. We're doing a bunch of improvements in downtown Naperville to provide Wi-Fi, and that is a funded project for that as well too. So this just contains those projects that are ready. The executive can come in at any point in time. They can review the details, have a conversation about that project, look at the funding sources that are proposed, and then put it forward for board authorization. And so at this point, they just come in, identify the status, change the status for those projects to board authorized, and put forth the formal CIP. Typically, right, what would happen? These little project polygons or project areas and summaries would go into a big formal document you guys produce for your community. That is the official CIP, and that would then go to your authorizing body, and they would then vote up or down the CIP and the plans for it. Once they do that, though, one of the great ways to share that CIP is with a story map. And so what you're looking at here is a configuration of the story map journal. that you can use to actually provide a real simple way for citizens to discover. It's a map-based way for citizens to discover the capital projects in your community. And so in this case, I've got all of the projects that were board authorized. I just have a few in this community. And I can go ahead and take a look at that information and get detailed costs about it. I can flip through a journal that kind of shows me each of the individual projects, what we have planned, and essentially it's a summary of that CIP document that you traditionally produce for your community, in a real simple way for people to discover the projects that are happening in the community, what types of improvements are going to be made, the funding source, and a simple cost estimate that you have at this point. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour of several different maps and apps that are in the capital project planning solution. And essentially what they do is help you start off with that project envisioning and lead you all the way through the capital improvement plan. Chris, let me stop for a minute and see if there's some questions that queued up through those demonstrations.
No questions.
No questions. Okay. All right. Pause. Anyone have any questions before I move on? Comments, thoughts? No? Okay.
Nope.
All right. So let's shift gears. And now, what have I got? I've got a CIP for my community, maybe a 5-year CIP that's been approved by my local council. I've got year 1 or year 2, depending on how you guys manage your fiscal environment, right? I've got funding for the projects in year 1, and I actually am beginning to execute on those projects. The next set of solutions I'm going to show you really help you with the capital project tracking process, right? So it's really, how do I track information about the projects throughout their life cycle and ultimately report those through the stakeholders. So let's go ahead and start with the first solution, which is a configuration of the Crowdsource polling application that's really designed for water distribution, in this case, water distribution or water engineers who are responsible for kind of overseeing these projects throughout their life cycle. In this case, I've got 2 projects I'm responsible for. I've got the Naperville Water Settlement Replacement. It's a project we're working. I can see the detailed information that was captured during the capital project planning process. And ultimately, I have the ability now to start a project journal, right? Many engineers have big folders with all kinds of documents in them, right? And they use that to track all of the activity on that project. And this is really a digital representation of that project journal. So as an engineer now, I can come in, maybe we just had a meeting on site. I can enter in the just had construction kickoff meeting on site, beginning site work on Monday. My name and details about that, right? So all I'm doing here is just recording information that's happening throughout the life cycle of the project. If I wanted to, I could attach photos to this to document maybe photos at the scene or at the site throughout the construction process and essentially create a digital log of what's happening. And not only could I attach photos, I could also attach documents and other things that are important to the logging that process. And so this is a very simple way for me to keep track of what's going on during the construction life cycle at each of these projects and see kind of what's happening throughout the process. Now, at some point in time, right, I need to report status to stakeholders in the organization. So the next application I'm going to show you is also designed for the engineers, but it's really about a simple way for them to report the status of capital projects in the community. So in this case, maybe I'm in charge of the water distribution system. I'm going to come in a second here. I'll see all of my water distribution projects that I just showed you a minute ago that I'm responsible for. In this case, I want to provide a status on the Naperville Settlement Water Main Project, right? It's a kind of a state and time. So I can come in here, select that project. I can say, you know what, we've just begun construction. The actual start date was today. Let's go ahead and say, we'll go forward and say it's May 25th. And I believe now, based on the plans we have, that the actual end date will be, let's just go 2017, let's say December 31st, 12, or December 31st. right? So now I can update the actuals. I've got costs. You know what? The cost of this one has gone up slightly since we first planned. I actually entered in the project status already. It's starting a bit late. It should be completed prior to the estimated, and our costs are, let's go ahead and modify this note, is now roughly $75,000 more. And if I want to attach any additional information, I can do that. So it's a simple way for me to report that information and now start to actually keep track of things and report it. So I can do this right at very regular intervals for my project. And at some point, you're going to want to get together and actually have a conversation about this across your entire project portfolio. So this is a configuration of operations dashboard for ArcGIS that allows the management team within your organization to review all of the current projects that are ongoing and get more, and see what the schedule, quality, and cost of those projects are. So if I click on that Naperville water main replacement project we just showed you, right, you can see the updates that I just provided, right? So it's now moved to the construction phase. It's starting late, and a little bit over budget. I can look at the kind of project schedule, and I can see my planned start dates and my actual start dates, my original estimated budget, and my actual costs as I have them now. And so it's a very simple way for executives within your organization to go through your project portfolio and have a conversation about each of these projects. We've seen this process in some cases, done with PowerPoint, with Excel, and others, and it's really challenging because they're actually, producing these reports for that meeting, and instead of driving it from the data that's available. And so this is a very simple way for that information to come to life for executives. Now, some of you may be using project management systems to track the schedule and costs associated with these projects, and if that's the case, that data could be loaded into ArcGIS and then used to do the reporting as we show you here. So finally, the last piece of this is how do you share the status of those capital projects with citizens and other stakeholders in your community? Why are construction barrels up in the streets, and when are we going to be done with that work activity? So this is a configuration of the local perspectives map that allows you to share capital project process or status with stakeholders in your community. So in this case, we'll just continue on with this Naperville project. Oops, actually, let's refresh this because I haven't refreshed it since we did those updates. If I refresh it, you'll see that when we go ahead and look at the projects now and click on that, you'll see, right, that this now reflects the status that we just updated as part of our internal process to report that to executives. And additional contact information is there if you would so choose to provide it. So this is a really simple way for you to provide a kind of a comprehensive inventory of all the projects ongoing in your community, and ultimately inform the public of the status of those projects and when they're scheduled to start and end in your community. So that was a very quick tour of all of the capital project planning and capital project tracking solutions we have available. Everything I showed you today is available on the solution site. And if you come here to the Maximize Capital Investments feature story and click Learn More, you'll see there's kind of two key aspects of this solution, which I showed you today. The solutions that help me kind of develop my capital project plans, and a set of solutions that help me monitor those capital projects. One thing we didn't touch on today, but is an emerging area that we're seeing in many communities, is the concept of participatory budgeting. Many cities across the country, or across the globe for that matter, are actually, instead of only allowing the engineers to put forth projects for improvement, they're actually allowing citizens to vote and propose projects that will be implemented through their capital improvement plan. That doesn't necessarily mean it's all of your capital project planning dollars, but it's a way to integrate citizens into that process. And so we worked with a group called Every Voice Engaged in the city of San Jose to develop a configuration of our crowdsource reporter solution that can be used for participatory budgeting. And it really feeds directly into your capital project planning process. So if you are starting to see participatory budgeting activities in your community, and there's a whole process behind that, we certainly have something that you can use to complement that participatory budgeting process, and really have a conversation with citizens in your community about how those public dollars should be spent. So I'll just close, and then maybe we can take some questions, Chris, that popped up with kind of where are we going. We showed you quite a few solutions today and how they all kind of come together to support that capital project planning process. But we are looking ahead at some enhancements for these solutions. One of the big things we've heard is that, how do we, Scott, that's great that I can look at all these projects on a map and I can see where they overlap in time and space, but I actually want to either be notified of the conflict or notified maybe when a third party or an external agency adds a project. In even a more enhanced environment, actually what I want is some kind of automated conflict detection that looks at projects within the same geography, proposed for the same time windows, and if something like that happens, it sends me a notification so I can immediately start to mitigate that process. And we have some tools we've been working on for email notification that'll be available at the user conference that'll really help with that simple notification process. When new projects are added, maybe when someone updates or amends a project or it changes from one status to another, there'll be a simple way for you to wire up email notifications and start to kind of flood people with information the projects move through that life cycle. But we are thinking about and working also on some more advanced configurations of ArcGIS to do the actual automated project conflict detection. And that's something we'll be working on the second half of this year. The other thing we are doing is actually working on ways to get the project planning solutions into our deployment tool, so you can just simply kind of have a one-click deployment process for that. Right now, there's a few steps that are documented on the solution site to set up these solutions, and we really want to make that easier for you so you can quickly configure one or more of the solutions that are available. So later this year, we'll be providing a configuration of these solutions in that deployment tool, and you'll essentially be able to select the one you're interested in and click deploy. And finally, another area that's related to this, certainly in parallel, is the concept of right-of-way permits and more transactional activity that's happening within the right-of-way. And we've been, kind of gathering requirements for a collection of solutions that would help you track those right-of-way permits, look at, similar types of conflicts with projects you have scheduled, ultimately how those right-of-way permits impact road closures, which we have a solution for, and then finally how do you share that permit activity with citizens and stakeholders inside the organization. And so, as I said, the right-of-way permitting is more transactional and kind of something that happens, on an everyday basis as opposed to these long-range capital projects, but it's definitely related and definitely an important part of the kind of overall management of the right-of-way in your community. So we're going to continue to evolve these solutions, and certainly any feedback you have would help us, drive them forward going into future releases. So that's it, Chris. That's all I had today, and certainly we've got plenty of time to take any questions that anyone may have.
Yeah, so we got a few questions from Christopher McLean regarding some of your earlier demos. How do you handle regulating access to some of these solutions for people who are in outside organizations?
Yeah, so I'm assuming Chris is referring to the external agency projects map or application.
Yeah.
So a simple way to do that is you could create an individual group. Actually, let me just show you. So what we've done here is that there's actually a group in ArcGIS Online that was set up for that process. So we come back here. There's a group that's got the actual map, application, and layer for that those external agencies. And that can be shared with just those external agents. In this case, we've got some generic users, but you could have a user from the cable company, a user from the school district. They are the only ones that have access to that group and the content in this group. That's one way you could do it. And they would then all of them would have access to the application they use to draw in their projects and see everyone else's projects. And as I mentioned earlier, this layer is set up so you can only modify the features that you create. So as a cable company, I can't modify another agency's project. That's one way. Another way is you could actually, as I said, be more specific and granular, where you could create multiple representations of this external agency project's application, only containing the projects for each of those different utilities or external agency, and then share just that with them. And you could get really, really granular, so they could only see their projects. They would only have access to their application. And so it just really depends on kind of how you want to share that, but essentially all of that kind of access is controlled through an ArcGIS online group and the members that you invite to that group. And you can see that it's a private group, so no one else can access it unless you add them to it or they're invited to it. And that's really how we're doing that.
So we'll follow up to that. So in that scenario, they would need to assign these agencies a named user to in their org. That's
correct. Yep.
Or I guess to also add on to that, they could potentially have a named user in another org and you could invite them to the group.
That's a good point too, Chris. Yep. If they have their own ArcGIS implementation. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So you showed this at the end after this question came in, but maybe you could reinforce it and where people can find these maps and apps.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so what I'll do is let me start from the beginning. So if you go to solutions.arcgis.com, you'll see, actually, this is where you'll land. And if you come down to the local government page, you'll see that our solutions are organized, by by industry. And today I was showing you a whole collection of public works offerings that are available. And in particular, I was giving you a detailed overview of the work we've done under Maximize Capital Investments, that feature story, and the capital project planning solutions and the capital project tracking solutions. And so all of the detailed information that you need, you can actually take a test drive of the applications I showed you today as well. And then if you want to begin to set them up in your organization, all the documentation is here. It talks about the software you need. There's some more information about the Try It Live, different releases, and then it'll essentially walk you through how to take the layers, create the groups, publish those layers that we interacted with today, like the infrastructure projects, create the maps, and configure the apps. So it'll walk you through the entire process, start to finish, to essentially configure the applications I showed you in your organization.
Could you give a little more insights into, so the question was, with some of these services that you've been showing, how is the data stored? Is it in a geodatabase in Oracle or SQL Server, or is it in the cloud? And then what kind of licenses do you need to deploy these solutions?
Yeah, so today, let me just start with kind of the license question. So everything that I showed you today really is provisioned through an ArcGIS organization. And that could be ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise or Portal for ArcGIS. You can choose kind of your deployment option. The data can be stored as hosted feature layers or as feature layers in your ArcGIS Data Store, or as a federated data store in your enterprise or workgroup geodatabase. So it's really quite flexible. You can decide where you want those layers to live. Essentially, what the solution boils down to is a series of, and you'll see this in the documentation, there's a series of capital project planning layers. And those layers there are a couple key ones. One is the infrastructure projects layer, which is what you're kind of interacting with throughout the entire life cycle. So when I started as an engineer and I started envisioning projects, I was populating content in this layer. And then even when I approve the project, you'll see there's a status that's associated with it, driving the life cycle. And then after I approve that project, you'll see then there's a whole set of characteristics I'm capturing during the construction process. So that's one of the key layers. Another key layer then are those external agency projects we talked about, pavement moratoriums, and then ultimately that published representation of your capital project plan. So all of the content is available, through the layers that we provide, and the documentation will walk you through how to take those layers and essentially publish them in your organization. But they are feature layers that can exist in a couple different places depending on your configuration.
Thanks, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
So you answered this. I just want to reiterate it. The question was if you can deploy to either ArcGIS Online or Portal, and yes, you have both of those options.
Yep.
This came up related when we were talking about licensing. So is the licensing per user? So one user per license for outside access?
It's using ArcGIS Online, and ArcGIS Online is or an ArcGIS Enterprise, and that is a user-based licensing model, correct? Yep.
When you mentioned the GIS Data Store, the question was, is this a name for where the local agency stores their data?
No, the ArcGIS Data Store is a specific configuration of your ArcGIS Enterprise implementation and a way to store hosted feature layers on premise. So it's if you're using ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS for Server on premise with Portal, then that's where the ArcGIS Data Store would come in. I don't know, Chris, if you want to elaborate on that, but.
Yeah, so the ArcGIS Data Store is actually a product, and now with Enterprise, it's one of the components of Enterprise that you get in addition to Portal, Server, Web, the Web Adapter, and ArcGIS Data Store is what you'll configure so you can publish hosted services to Portal, similar how you would publish hosted services to online. But you could have a different data store that is your SQL Server or Oracle. That is where the data lives.
Right. Yeah, or ArcGIS Online hosted feature layers and secure them that way as well too, right? I mean, you got a bunch of different options depending on your organization, and even though you publish them in ArcGIS Online, that doesn't mean they're publicly available, right? They are all secured and only visible to those users you assign them to. So that's just the one thing that we should be clear about too. ArcGIS Online doesn't mean they're public necessarily.
A question came in about access from outside. Can you allow access to apps to someone outside of your organization to a group and then share your apps with that group?
Absolutely. Yeah, you just have to invite those. You have to assign those external agencies a username and then invite them to that group and share the applications and maps. The other thing you'll want to do too is, much like I showed you, you'll want to share the maps and the application, or I'm sorry, the layers with that group as well too, because then you have to do more than just share the application, because if the layers in the map aren't shared at that same level as well too, they won't be able to access it. So you kind of share it all as a package in that group, and then invite those external agencies to that group.
How would you track the internal CIP costs, like inspections during the capital project cycle?
That's interesting. I'm assuming, Chris, maybe we can ask them, are they talking about during the construction phase? Probably, I would guess, maybe. If so, one of the things you could do is you could enhance this, the project journal solutions to capture that information. And maybe one of the comments, you could actually do a couple things. You could maybe add a status field. This is actually kind of an interesting idea, or some kind of event character attribute here that's got a domain that maybe says just a site visit, inspection, whatever else you may have on there in terms of why you'd be going to the site, and then check that, and then add, if there is costs associated with it, you could capture them there as well too as part of that inspection or kind of log in the project journal. That's one way you could definitely do it. Yeah, that gets tricky. We were consciously not getting into detailed project cost accounting. So you probably see that, is that there's a pretty bright line, right, where all we're doing is keeping project totals. We didn't get into project cost accounting at all. And we did that for a very pretty conscious reason, because ArcGIS isn't really well suited for that. So, but those summary costs you could definitely capture there. I guess I'd be careful. That's all I would say. Seems like a slippery slope.
Yep. So the follow-up was definitely during the construction phase, like work order per visit and labor equipment and
Yeah.
such. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really where I would probably encourage you to look at your maintenance management system and track it in there. And if you don't have one, that's probably a good reason to start to look at one, because that's definitely exactly what those things are well tuned for. And we didn't want to get into that space for sure.
Can all of these apps and maps work with an organization that uses ArcGIS Online but doesn't use a server and uses 10.2.1 to match their utility model support?
Well, they're actually, the layers could be there. One thing I'll mention is that as you notice in these maps, there aren't any really utility layers per se in these maps. Now, there could definitely be in the capital project planning ones. There's no technical reason why you couldn't add 10.1 utility layers to this map so engineers could see that as part of their project planning process. The features themselves, which are the project polygons, could be stored in a set of hosted feature layers then in that case that complement everything else. So the projects are in ArcGIS Online as secure hosted feature layers, and the map services that you spin out of your 10.2.1 server implementation could then be loaded as a reference layer in the same map. No problem with that. I think that's what they're getting at, Chris.
Yeah. Yep. So another question about external users, can they be just level 1 or do they need to be level 2 users?
They need to be able to edit features. So I believe they'd have to be a level 2 user.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
When using the solution deployment tool, does it work the same when deploying to ArcGIS Online versus Portal for ArcGIS?
You want to hit that, Chris?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it depends from solution to solution, and we attempt to support Portal as much as we can. ArcGIS Online always has the latest versions of solutions. So there might be features that are available in Online that aren't available in the most recent version of Portal. So in that case, that solution wouldn't be supported on Portal. But when a newer version of Portal came out that contained those features that are available in Online, then we could support deploying to Portal. In the case of these solutions yet, we haven't ported them to the deployment tool, but that's something that we're looking at in the fall to support. And at that time, we'll evaluate what versions of Portal we can support with the solutions as part of the deployment tool. So if the project features are hosted only online, how can you keep a historic record?
Well, the features won't be deleted unless you delete them. So you could continue to have projects going forward, or even load historical projects in to that layer. So there's nothing that's, and with the hosted feature layer and online, you can keep track of who has access to edit, who did make the edits, and when they made the edits. If you want to create an archive, which I think you may be thinking about or maybe referencing, you could always download the features from that hosted layer on a regular basis into a file geodatabase and store them that way as well too if you wanted to. But the feature layers, it'll never go away just because it's in online, and you can continue to add new features to it. And essentially then the filters on your map really drive what's visible in those layers.
Cool. One last question. Is there going to be a local government lunch meetup at the user conference this year?
Well, that's two different questions, really. Yes, there will be a meetup, and we're trying to get lunch for everyone, yes, because we know everyone's busy and hard to get lunch in San Diego, but we definitely will have a local government meetup. We did post it on the meetup site. So it is the room and when it's going to happen. I think it's Wednesday this year. And we're looking for sponsors for that lunch. So everyone can get some food and we can have a good conversation around the solutions we're working on. So thanks for bringing that up.
Cool. So that's all the questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. It was a great conversation around it. Hopefully you saw some real value and use in the capital project planning solutions. We're going to continue to evolve them, so your feedback is really important. If you see gaps in the solution or have questions about how you can configure it in your organization, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'd like to hear from you, and we're going to continue to grow and evolve them based on the feedback we get from the community. So thanks a lot for the time today.
Yes, thanks for joining us on today's meetup. We look forward to seeing and hearing from you at our next meetup on Thursday, June 22nd, where we'll be discussing what's coming in the ArcGIS for Local Government release and talk about events at the ESRI 2017 User Conference. Until then, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.